Chapter 281. Olivia exited the water, holding back her fear and trying not to vomit. She looked at the body cautiously, hoping to find something that could identify the body. The clothes on the body were expensive. It was the high-end product of some luxury brand. The diamond earrings she had on glittered dimly under the light. There was also a sapphire ring on her finger. It looked like it would belong to some wealthy person's collection. Evidently, her murderer wasn't after money, or else her jewelry would have been gone. There also weren't any signs of sexual abuse on her clothes. There was a gunshot wound on her chest. The cause of her death was likely the shot to her chest. Olivia could tell that the body came from money. But she hadn't heard about any missing heiresses recently. She sighed helplessly. She decided to inform the authorities after she got out of there. She wanted the body to find her way back to her family. Olivia felt pity for the body. Olivia suddenly heard the sound of a helicopter over her. The person in the panda suit had retreated. Ethan had arrived. Olivia chose to remain hidden. She knew she would be vulnerable to the person's schemes if out in the open. Olivia barely escaped death this time. She was determined to uncover the person's identity and was finally free of Ethan's control. Olivia hid among the debris and watched as Ethan approached Marina, who was left on the shore. She could still see a huge blood stain on Ethan's chest. But she couldn't see his expression because he was too far away. Brent had a doctor examine Marina. Miss Carlton is just unconscious. She doesn't have any serious injuries. Ethan ignored Brent's words. His eyes were fixed on the rope dangling in midair that had been severed. The image of Olivia falling into the ocean was still haunting him. He said in a hoarse voice, "Find her. I want to see her, dead or alive." Brent didn't know how to comfort Ethan. "Mr. Miller, fortune will surely favor Mrs. Miller. Don't be too pessimistic." Even Brent didn't believe his own words. He knew that even if Olivia survived the fall, the person wouldn't let her live. In the time it took Ethan to fly here, Olivia was probably already. However, he would never say these things to Ethan. Ethan didn't say a thing. He exuded an air of gloom. It was as if his heart had stopped beating the moment Olivia fell into the ocean. Ethan felt like there was a hole in his chest. He felt empty. He was still alive, but he couldn't feel anything. All he had on his mind was Olivia. His hands were shaking uncontrollably. It was not the first time Ethan experienced the death of someone he was close to. He was devastated when Kurt died. But the death of Olivia made his existence nothing but pain. Even the breeze that blew on him felt like knives piercing his skin. He even started to see illusions. He thought he saw Olivia standing in the ocean, waving to him. "Come to me, Ethan," he heard her say. "Don't be afraid, live. I'm coming." Ethan was about to walk into the ocean, but Kelvin pulled him back. "You have to pull yourself together, Mr. Miller." Ethan frowned and said with bewilderment, "Where's Liv? Where did she go?" "Mr. Miller, we haven't found Mrs. Miller yet." Ethan patted himself on the chest and said, "Liv is dead. She left me behind. She's such a timid person. She must be so afraid. I have to go with her." Chapter 282. Olivia saw Ethan throwing a fit as she stood on the boat's deck. Ethan was like a lion that was out of control. It took several people to hold him back from jumping into the ocean. He only stopped after Kelvin and Brent worked together and injected him with some sedatives. Olivia watched from a distance. She barely even felt anything. She was even more unhinged than Ethan the time she found out her baby had passed. Olivia chose to sneak away while they were still looking for her body out at sea. She was determined to live, even if her body was sickly and battered. She could only exact revenge for herself and her dead child. She was very close to uncovering the person's identity. She didn't want to collapse so close to the finishing line. She had to see things through. Olivia was drenched in putrid water. Her palms were scratched by the ropes that bound her. There was a thin layer of scab on her palms that hurt with the slightest touch. Her stomach had been hurting all day. She was barely holding on to her consciousness. She dragged her feet as she walked on the side of the road. She saw a car heading her way. She flagged it down without hesitation. The blinding headlights hurt her eyes. She collapsed to the ground before she even saw the car stop. Olivia had a very long dream. She experienced the first half of her life from a third-person perspective. Everything ended on the rope she severed, including her longing for her mother and her deep love for Ethan. Chloe shouted in her face to let Marina live and to let her die. She chose Marina over her. Olivia abruptly opened her eyes and sat up from the bed. Snowball purred and leapt into her arms. The room was filled with a pleasant scent. A young man's gentle voice said, "You're finally awake, Olivia." Olivia looked toward Colin. For a moment, she wasn't sure if she was dreaming. "How did I get here, Colin?" Colin quickly explained, "Olivia, you scared me so much. I went to the elevator to look for you. All I found was your smashed phone. Then, the kidnapping incident garnered widespread attention online. I recognized you immediately. I was so scared for you. I followed behind the Miller's cars to the beach to look for you. Luckily, I found you on the side of the road." Olivia panicked and asked, "Does anyone else know that you saved me?" "No, I brought you straight home after I found you unconscious on the ground. I didn't inform anyone." Olivia sighed in relief. She saw Colin looking confused. She explained, "I was so close to death, Colin. If my enemies knew I was alive, they'd send people to kill me." "Don't worry, Olivia. The people that kidnapped you must have planned it for a long time. I didn't dare to tell anyone that you were with me. That's why I didn't take you to the hospital. You did good, Colin." Olivia noticed that her palms were already appropriately bandaged and relaxed. Colin looked at her pale face with a pained expression. "Currently, no one knows that you're with me, but you won't be able to get the surgery you scheduled." "It doesn't matter." Olivia's expression grew colder. "I swear I will never stop hunting her as long as I'm alive." "Olivia, do you know the people that kidnapped you?" Olivia replied slowly, "That's what I'd also like to know. I want to know who would want me dead so badly." Chapter 283. Olivia was hurt pretty badly. But luckily, there weren't any life-threatening conditions. She had no choice but to take time to recover at Colin's place. Unlike the peace within the Moriarty residence's walls, the outside world was in chaos. Ethan expended a lot of resources trying to find Olivia's body at sea. No stone was left unturned. He was getting so out of hand that he even wanted to surround the part of the ocean where Olivia fell in and drain the water. The money needed for that idea was only a minor problem. The main problem was that it would cause social uproar. The netizens began to make fun of Ethan. The last time so much effort was put into draining water was when they wanted to catch an alligator gar. And they say Marina is his true love. The way I see it, Marina is nothing to Mr. Miller compared to his ex-wife. It has been 3 days. Hasn't anyone dug up information about Mr. Miller's ex-wife? It's not that no one tried to look her up. It's that no one dared to. Marina spent so much effort planning the engagement ceremony. But she became a laughingstock at the end. Everyone found out that Ethan didn't love her at all. Chloe also attracted plenty of attention. She was known as the mother who betrayed her own daughter to save her stepdaughter. Everyone on the internet was mocking her. Chloe hadn't been in the best of health. The shock from Olivia falling into the ocean hospitalized her. To make matters worse, she was diagnosed with leukemia. Chris stayed by her side the whole time. He was exhausted from the ordeal. At the same time, he was greatly saddened by the state Chloe was in. He looked at her pale complexion and held her hand lightly. He said, "Olivia hasn't been found yet. That's good news. She must still be alive." Chloe had become very frail. She held Chris' hand and sighed. "For the past 2 days, I kept dreaming about her. She was drenched in seawater and was waving at me, asking me to join her. She must hate me so much right now." Chris patted her on the head. "She wouldn't do that. She's a good kid. I'm sure she wouldn't blame you. You had no choice." Chloe covered her face with her hands. Tears flowed between her fingers. She wept and said, "I am her mother, but I chose someone else over her. She must be so disappointed in me. I think karma is coming back to me now. I've not long to live. I'll be joining her in death soon." "Stop talking nonsense. I spent a fortune searching for compatible bone marrow. There are so many people in the world. There's definitely someone compatible. Don't give up." Chloe hugged Chris tightly and said, "I'm not afraid of dying. I just don't want to leave you alone in this world. We wasted so much of our lives away from each other. Why is fate so cruel to us? You won't die, Chris comforted her. I'll never allow it. Don't be afraid. You're not at the terminal stage yet. We still have time. Chris' words calmed Chloe down. He fed her some soup and lulled her to sleep. Chris sighed as he looked at Chloe's sleeping face. He turned to the servant next to him. Don't let her get on the internet these few days. Yes, sir. Chris had already spent a lot of money trying to remove all traces of the discussions about Marina and Chloe. But the discussions always resurfaced again, seemingly without end. Chloe's mental and physical state have both been severely impacted. She had become very fragile. He didn't want her to be hurt anymore. Chris went next door to check up on Marina. She quickly hid something under her pillow as soon as he walked in. What are you hiding? Chris asked with a frown. It's my phone. I hid it because you forbade me from going online. Chris rubbed his eyebrows and said with a slightly hoarse voice, there is a lot of negative press about our family on the internet right now. It's best if you don't get hung up on them. I know, Dad. By the way, have your bone marrow compatibility test results come out yet? Panic flickered in Marina's eyes as she said, it's out, but my bone marrow isn't compatible with Chloe's. It's such a pity. I wish I could have helped her. Chris patted her on the shoulder and said, it's not your fault. Rest well for now. Okay, Dad. Marina watched as Chris left the room. She quickly dialed Otto's number. What should I do, Grandpa? My bone marrow is compatible with that bitch. I don't want to give her any of my bone marrow. You know I can't handle pain. Don't worry, Marina, I'll take care of it for you. All you have to do is not admit that your bone marrow is compatible with her. Thanks, Grandpa. Marina hung up. She had a cold expression on her face. She wanted Chloe dead as much as she wanted Olivia to die. Chapter 284. In recent days, Chloe wasn't the only one suffering. Ethan wasn't doing any better. He barely ate or drank anything, nor did he rest or sleep. He was very tightly wound. The search for Olivia was constantly on his mind. It pained Kelvin to see Ethan in such a weakened state. Mr. Miller, you should at least eat something. Your body won't be able to hold out at this rate. Ethan's throat was parched, and his lips were chapped. Brent hurriedly got him a cup of tea. Ethan was only barely able to speak after downing a cup of warm tea, but his voice was still hoarse. The thing I had you investigate. The surveillance on the elevator was already destroyed when we got there. There isn't any useful footage. But we uncovered their link with an international organization through their kidnapping of Miss Carlton. What organization? The Toxic Hive. Ethan put a cigarette to his lips out of habit and tried to light it up with his lighter. But his fingers were shaking uncontrollably. The lack of nutrients and rest severely weakened his body. Kelvin quickly came up to Ethan and helped him light up the cigarette. Is it that secretive organization that has some of the best doctors in the world but only researches prohibited drugs? That's the one, Brent said with a serious expression. The Toxic Hive recruited top medical researchers from all over the world. They do all sorts of research and human experiments banned by countries worldwide and the World Health Organization. They started a virus war 5 years ago that affected people worldwide. They are a bunch of heartless barbarians. Ethan's brows furrowed tightly. He didn't have any grudges with the Toxic Hive. It was a large organization that encompassed all areas of the globe. They even have labs in the coldest and hottest places in the world. The members are all scientific geniuses. They were dubbed the demonic geniuses in human skin. These people were obsessed with their research. They didn't usually do kidnapping. The members of the Toxic Hive have killed people, but they have also saved people. There were quite a few cases of them curing terminal illnesses. Some people saw them as angels, but others saw them as the harbinger of diseases. Ethan knew they didn't capture Olivia or Marina for the research. If they needed guinea pigs for their research, they would have taken the guests too, not just 2 women. It felt like the kidnapping wasn't related to the organization but a personal vendetta. But that confused Ethan. He knew Olivia very well. She was a loving person. She wouldn't possibly offend someone to such a degree that they would want her life. No wonder we couldn't find Leo. He must be a part of the Toxic Hive, too. That should be the case. Ethan frowned as his fingers clasped around his cigarette tightly. Even if Liv is alive, she would suffer a fate worse than death if she fell into their hands. They would use her to test their drugs, and she would be tormented to no end. Mr. Miller, the toxic hive had evacuated in a hurry before we got here. Maybe they didn't find Mrs. Miller. She had a knife and cut the ropes before she fell. Brent licked his lips and continued, Mrs. Miller had always been a good swimmer. There were a lot of abandoned boats that she could have hidden behind. She may have gone into hiding. Or else, the people who kidnapped her would surely try to agitate you with her corpse. They went radio silent for so many days, it can only mean one thing. Mrs. Miller is still alive. The toxic hive didn't get to her. A glimmer of hope lit up in Ethan's eyes. That's it. Liv wanted me to avenge her by finding them before she fell. That wasn't a farewell for good. She was trying to tell me something. Chapter 285. Brent was relieved to see some spark in Ethan's eyes. He quickly continued, that's true. Mrs. Miller is a pacifist. She wouldn't ask you to avenge her otherwise. Ethan frowned at the reminder. He recalled Olivia trying to tell him something but never actually speaking up. What she wanted me to investigate wasn't only the toxic hive. She also wanted me to look into the incident with Jeff and my sister. Ethan remembered that Olivia had visited the Miller residence before the kidnapping. She probably knew something was wrong. It was like the spy cameras planting in Ethan's office. It was clear someone had been plotting against him for some time. But this concerned his taboo. It was something he didn't allow anyone to bring up, not even Olivia. That was why Olivia had to risk everything and investigate by herself to find the truth. Mr. Miller, do we need to look into Miss Leia's incident? Brent asked cautiously. Ethan looked up into the sky and stared at the dimly lit stars among the clouds. He realized the truth was always there, but someone had intentionally hidden it. Investigate. Look into it carefully. Leave no stone unturned. Ethan had made up his mind. If something was wrong with his sister's death, he wouldn't let the people behind it roam free. He decided to revisit his trauma. This time, we'll change things up a little. What kind of change? Kelvin was shocked. All the evidence that we found last time felt like they were planted by someone who wanted us to find them. We were being led on. This time, we will start our investigation from the Fordham's angle. Brent stared at Ethan's expression and nodded. Understood. Where would she be if she was alive? Ethan wondered. We're not the only ones looking for her. The toxic hive must be looking, too. She must be hiding in a place no one expects her to be. But where would this place be? Kelvin recalled something and said softly, Mr. Miller, Mrs. Carlton was diagnosed with leukemia 2 days ago. It isn't looking good. Do you want to visit her? Leukemia. It's karma coming back to bite her, Ethan said with a smirk. He thought Chloe wasn't fit to be a mother. Brent said awkwardly, about that, Mr. Miller. You should still visit her anyway. The Carltons are still looking for you to give them an explanation. Ethan had been focused on looking for Olivia the past few days. Otto was throwing a fit. It was time for Ethan to visit the Carltons. There's no rush. Dress my wound with fresh bandages first. Brent was overjoyed. Ethan had finally agreed to change the bandages. The wound on his chest was bandaged while he was unconscious. Ethan hadn't allowed anyone to get close to him for the past few days. The condition of his wound has been left unchecked. It was a good thing that Ethan was starting to cooperate with the treatment of his wound. The wound hadn't been soaked in water. It didn't worsen. Ethan had always been physically fit. The flesh was already growing back on his injury. Ethan looked at the wound and smiled icily. Brent was standing behind him and happened to see his expression. It sent chills down Brent's spine. Ethan looked like a demon that clawed his way up from hell. Brent, move Jeff to another nursing home. Brent calmed himself down and said, yes, Mr. Miller. Not only did Ethan cooperate with the treatment of his wound, but he also ate. Before he could finish eating, he received the news. Miter Miller, bad news. Mr. Fordham has been taken. Chapter 286. Ethan slammed the spoon he held onto the table and shouted, what do you mean he has been taken? Kelvin urgently said, Mrs. Miller had dispatched extra guards to watch over Mr. Fordham about 2 weeks ago. I didn't really concern myself with it, but it would seem like she knew someone would go after Mr. Fordham. There were already 2 groups of people in a gunfight when we arrived. Some nurses were injured in the crossfire. The hospital has temporarily stopped the news from spreading. Where is Jeff? One of the groups took him. From my initial calculations, there were 4 different groups, including us. Excluding Olivia's hired muscle and Ethan's men, another group would be the Toxic Hive. But the 4th group was unknown. It was uncertain which group took Jeff. Ethan noticed that Kelvin's voice sounded a little feeble. He knew something was wrong. Are you hurt? Kelvin was holding his own arm tightly. Blood was seeping from his palm. He gritted his teeth and said, "It's no big deal, Mr. Miller. It was my fault. I didn't expect them to go so far." He was not alone in thinking that. Ethan also didn't expect such an intense situation to arise from an unconscious man like Jeff. Even a notorious international group was in on it. Ethan hung up the phone. It wasn't a good sign that the Toxic Hive was operating within Aldenvine. This organization didn't belong to any country in particular. Several of its members were death row prisoners on the run. The organization was characterized by its genius medical professionals and their boundless cruelty. They could sacrifice the lives of thousands just to test the results of their research. Most people stayed away from them. But there were also some people who were desperate to save their loved ones. They would take the risk to deal with the devil. Many important businessmen and politicians from countries worldwide had ties to the organization to buy prohibited drugs from them. Ethan had no tolerance for a rogue organization like the Toxic Hive. He needed professionals to handle these people. The hospital was on lockdown. There was blood splattered everywhere, even on the ceilings. The fight over Jeff was vicious. The people had no care for the well-being of the civilians. Kelvin's arm was injured because he tried to protect a nurse. Mr. Miller, these people are so full of themselves. They had no regard for human life and shut up the hospital. Ethan looked at the bullet holes in the door. His expression turned serious. I can see that. How many casualties are there? 8 were killed, 24 critically injured, and 12 with minor wounds. This could be considered an extremely serious security breach. The victims were told to keep the incident to themselves. No one was allowed in or out of the hospital. The officials kept coming. A lot of the people on the scene were shocked. They had never experienced something so frightening. Jeff's room was in the best condition. There wasn't any blood spilled in there. His caregivers only received minor injuries. Ethan emerged from the security perimeter and entered the ward of Jeff's caregiver. Ethan was meeting the caregiver for the first time. As the door opened, the caregiver looked towards the entrance with a respectful expression and bowed her head out of habit. "Sir, I'm fine, it's just my foot. You are, Mr. Miller." The caregiver was intimidated. She had only been visited by the police and government officials. She didn't know why a famous businessman would visit her. She thought he had come to the wrong room. It was already springtime, but Ethan's presence seemed to bring along a chilling sensation. He nodded and signaled the caregiver to be at ease. Ethan carried himself with dignity. He said expressionlessly, "You don't have to sit up. Just answer some of my questions." The caregiver suddenly interjected, "You're Miss Fordham's ex-husband, right?" Chapter 287. The caregiver didn't expect to meet Ethan under such circumstances. Ethan was taken aback but didn't deny, "Yes." The caregiver thought about her words. She didn't want to risk causing trouble for Olivia. She explained anxiously, "Miss Fordham didn't tell me. I just took a wild guess. The incident at your engagement ceremony was all over the internet. Even though Miss Fordham was blindfolded, I recognized her immediately." The caregiver suddenly lowered her voice and asked, "Have you found her yet?" Ethan didn't want to talk about that with her. Nothing will happen to her. That's right. Miss Fordham is such a lovely person. She'll get through this. The caregiver wiped her tears and said, "Mr. Miller, feel free to ask any questions. I'll tell you everything I know about Miss Fordham." Ethan had so many things he wanted to say, but nothing came out. It was like he had lost his voice. "Did she ever talk about me?" Ethan opened with a question that he cared about the most. The caregiver shook her head and said, never. She's a stubborn person. I first got to know her when Mr. Fordham was in an accident. Miss Fordham was taking care of everything while she was pregnant. I saw the ring on her finger. I suggested that she should ask her husband to come and help. Whenever I brought that up, she would shake her head and say you were busy. Since the beginning, no matter how hard her life was, she never complained to anyone. Mr. Miller, I just found out that you were her husband. I have been wondering about something. The caregiver stared at Ethan and said, you didn't give Miss Fordham time or happiness. What about money? Why didn't you at least give her that? If you couldn't provide her with anything, what's the point of the marriage? Ethan was stunned. He was a dignified man, but the caregiver's words were like a rude awakening. Seems like no one has ever said something like this to you, Mr. Miller. I'm just a regular person. I've seen how Miss Fordham lived these 2 years. Do you know how hard her life has been? You probably don't, right? After all, you've been spending time with your new woman. The caregiver's temper flared up. She started to recount the things that Ethan had done to Olivia. Miss Olivia came from a good family. She's pretty and kind, a perfect woman. She wouldn't be living such a hard life even if she married a regular man. Have you ever visited your father-in-law in the 2 years he was here? Where were you when your father-in-law was in the operating room? Or when Miss Fordham was waiting outside the operating room while carrying your baby? The caregiver raised her voice and said, you finally appeared after Mr. Fordham has been taken and Miss Fordham has gone missing. You're a day late and $1 short. You've missed the boat. It's too little, too late. Brent coughed softly and said, lady, please calm down. Calm down. How could I calm down? Even though I'm not Miss Fordham's family, I witnessed all her hardships these 2 years. And she had to end up like this. I feel so sorry for her. The man she didn't allow anyone to say a bad word about also caused her to die an untimely death. Fuck you and your money. You should have been the one to die instead of her. You cold-blooded scum. Chapter 288. When Ethan left the room, his body was cold. Even after the long talk with Cecily, that same question kept ringing in his head. Why is Olivia the person who's dead but not me? He suddenly recalled the same question he asked Olivia about why the person who was dead was Leah but not her. Now, he knew how much those words actually hurt. Ethan wondered how Olivia put up with them. He was watching a woman in the hallway. She was staring at the operating room with teary eyes in the hallway. At that moment, he thought the woman was a pregnant Olivia. Mr. Miller, what are you looking at? Brent followed Ethan's gaze only to notice a stranger. Send me the surveillance footage in the hospital as long as it has Olivia. Ethan's voice was hoarse. Yes, sir. When Ethan was getting into the car, he almost tripped. At this point, even though Ethan didn't know what the truth was, it was highly possible that Jeff wasn't Leah's murderer. The deeper he dug into the case, the more complicated it got. The number of people involved and incidents that were connected was increasing. Considering that he hadn't rested for days, he was exhausted. However, he wasn't sleepy. He lay against the leather seat, repeating the same question in his head. If Jeff wasn't the murderer, why did I torture Olivia for the past 2 years? The sheer thought of that possibility gave him a sheen of cold sweat. Olivia was the woman Ethan loved the most, yet he kept hurting her in the most hurtful way possible. She was scarred for life. Ahead of the final days of her life, she had been struggling to survive a hellish life. Hugging his head, he grabbed his hair. He was repenting for what he had done to her all this time. Don't worry, Mr. Miller. Mrs. Miller will be fine. Yeah, the opponent took Mr. Fordham away, but they didn't hurt him. It's obvious that he's their trump card to lure Miss Fordham out. This means that Miss Fordham is still alive. Calvin and Brent supposed that Ethan was getting worried about Olivia. In truth, Ethan was actually blaming himself. The guilt was eating him up. He didn't know what he should do with their relationship when he met Olivia again. Someone like him didn't have the right to take advantage of her. He was still grabbing his hair when a cold glint flashed across his eyes. Actually, there was still a way. It didn't matter if Leah's death had anything to do with Jeff. All Ethan needed to do was to convince Olivia that Jeff was the murderer with proof. That way, she would return to his side. Ethan raised his head. His eyes were teeming with obsession. He thought, Liv, I will never let you leave my side. Even if you're going to die, you have to stay in my sight. Brent took a glance at the back seat. The car window happened to reflect the menacing smile across Ethan's lips. Brent thought, has Mr. Miller gone mad? His smile is scary. Mr. Miller, those guys in Aldenvine won't be able to hide for long. It's a matter of time before we find them. Don't worry too much about it. There's no need to rush. Just find them, said Ethan. Then, he would kill those people. He would neither let Leia's murderer off the hook easily nor would he let go of Olivia. He was aware that his relationship with Olivia would be completely ruined if the truth came to light, and he would never let that happen. Chapter 289. Olivia was recovering in the Moriarty residence. It had been sunny recently, so she lay in the yard while hugging Snowball, enjoying the sunlight. The breeze blew, swirling the cherry blossom on the ground. A few white cats were running in the yard. It was a beautiful scenery to behold, yet Olivia couldn't have peace of mind at all. The news of her going missing went viral online. Everyone was throwing mud at Marina for being a homewrecker and claiming Chloe to be cruel for selling her daughter off for money. The Carltons spent a lot of money to delete those articles, but a new one would be released every single time they did that. On the contrary, Olivia's personal information was well protected. She didn't feel happy upon reading those negative comments about Marina. After all, she and Marina equally lost the game. The only things that concerned Olivia were Jeff and Jack. Jeff suddenly showed up in public while Jack had gone missing. She was certain that Jack was either in trouble or dead. Olivia, something on your mind? Colin's voice resounded from behind. Olivia, who was deeply absorbed in her thoughts, blinked. My father. I wonder if the other party will hurt him if they know that I'm alive. He served her a plate of fruits. With one knee on the ground, he brought a strawberry to her lips. She didn't notice that he had put his pride down, but he wasn't bothered by it. All he wanted to do was to please her. Olivia, if you're worried, I can move your father to a safer place. Olivia's eyes lit up. Really, will it be troublesome for you to make that happen? He grinned as he was genuinely happy. It is my honor to be able to help you. It's not troublesome, but judging from how they dared to resort to a kidnap, it seems like they're not ordinary people. I can't ask a favor from ordinary people, either, he said. She frowned. I've hired a few men in the hospital just in case. Leave it to me, Olivia. Trust me, Colin said. He smiled at her. Olivia, I think there's something that you should know. What? He placed the plate of fruit to a side, attracting the cats. He shooed two of them away before showing her his phone. You should read it yourself. Her expression changed as soon as she read the content. Is this true? He nodded. The Carlton family released the article, so it should be true. Mr. Carlton is looking for a suitable bone marrow for her. Olivia. He gazed at Olivia deeply. What do you think about this? She returned the phone to him calmly. I've settled the scores between us. I don't owe her anything now. Doesn't she have another daughter? They can ask for it from Marina. What if Marina's bone marrow is not compatible, but yours is? Olivia didn't know what Colin had in mind, but she said firmly, I won't go. It was enough to be daydreaming for over 10 years. Furthermore, she wasn't in good health. She caressed Snowball's head. It pulled its ears down, shutting its eyes sleepily while purring. Olivia lowered her gaze. I just want to spend the rest of my days taking care of my father. She wished she could clear Jeff's name and find out the truth as well. She didn't want to think about anything other than that. After knowing her answer, Colin said, Olivia, if I remember correctly, you've been looking for Leo, haven't you? What if I say I can find him for you? Chapter 290. Olivia suddenly raised her head, staring right at Colin's eyes. Really, Colin, are you able to find Leo? She couldn't believe what she was hearing. After all, not even Ethan could find Leo. Colin didn't seem like he was lying. A flame of hope was ignited in her. Yeah, I heard that Leo went into hiding after offending someone abroad. No one could find him, but I happen to have the connections to do so, Colin said. Olivia thought, it's no wonder that Ethan couldn't find him. He wasn't lying. She said, "What about my father's surgery? Olivia, you're not safe as long as you're in the country. If that person can drive you to the edge once, it can happen twice. Even Mr. Fordham's life is in danger. I can send both of you abroad together. You can stay out of harm's way while he receives treatment," he suggested. She frowned. It was something she had never thought of before. Rather, it was something she didn't dare to think about. Ethan's shadow was always looming over her, fettering her with restraints. She unconsciously drew an invisible boundary, trapping herself. Colin continued, "Olivia, a lot of my friends practice medicine. They are living abroad. They're the top specialists in the medical field. I can't guarantee a 100% success rate for your treatment. But your possibility to survive the cancer will surely be higher than what the doctors in the country can offer you." He licked his lips and added, "I can see that you've gotten over your ex-husband. What is there that's holding you back? You can start life anew abroad." She muttered in disbelief, "Can I do that?" Colin didn't let up with his persuasions. "Of course, you can. Who are you?" He grabbed her shoulders. "You're Olivia Fordham, a talented medical student. You once abandoned your bright future for that man. Don't you want to restart the life which you once abandoned before?" Her eyes were showing a ray of hope. He continued to spur her on. "The Olivia Fordham I know isn't a woman that's abandoned by a man. She's a strong woman who has the willpower to start anew even after a downfall. Olivia, not even death can stop you. Do you fear the idea of starting a new life?" She closed her eyes. Her eyelids were trembling. "He won't allow me to leave Aldenvine. If I fail to leave, I will have to pay a heavy price for it. I won't be able to handle it." She released Snowball and covered her face. "I'm no longer the Olivia Fordham who's free to wander around the world. Colin, what you're seeing right now is a scarred and fettered bird in a cage. Olivia, if you're a caged bird, I'm the person that can break the shackles for you. I will make all the necessary arrangements for you and Mr. Fordham. Before Ethan knows it, our plane will already land in a foreign land." Olivia showed hesitation. "Even if they have a guess that you're alive, they don't know your whereabouts, let alone the fact that you're abroad. Olivia, we can travel by water. It's inconvenient for Leo to show himself in Aldenvine, but he can come to the high seas. Mr. Fordham can undergo surgery on a deserted island. And you can receive treatment and focus on your recovery there, too. Ethan won't be able to find you there forever." At that point, Colin's emotions became forceful. He grabbed Olivia's arm. "You won't be able to see him forever, so what is there to be afraid of? If Mr. Fordham is the only person you're worried about, I can make sure that he doesn't leave your sight. No one can ever threaten you. And you no longer need to be afraid of getting kidnapped. You can get plastic surgery and start life anew." Olivia was so tempted by his enticing offer that she couldn't retort his remarks. "Colin, I can leave the country with you, but there's something I have to do." "What is it? Tell me." Resentment sparked in her eyes. "I don't want my father to bear the sin forever for something he hadn't done. As long as I'm alive, I will find out who the mastermind is.